To truly understand the genesis of the First Crusade, that pivotal moment in history, we must first delve into the world from which it emerged, examining the complex tapestry of political, religious, and social forces at play. We need to understand the anxieties, ambitions, and fervent beliefs that propelled this monumental event. Europe in the late 11th century was a continent fractured along many lines, a patchwork of competing interests and rivalries. It was a violent era, characterized by near-constant warfare, and ruled by a network of feudal lords who were perpetually vying for power and territory. These lords engaged in endless skirmishes and power struggles, creating an atmosphere of instability and uncertainty. Amidst this fragmented landscape, the Catholic Church stood as the one significant unifying force, a beacon of shared belief. It provided a common identity, a shared set of values and rituals that transcended the boundaries of individual kingdoms and principalities, offering a sense of belonging to a larger community. Meanwhile, to the east, the Byzantine Empire, once a dominant power in the Mediterranean world, was now significantly weakened, its borders shrinking, and facing a growing threat from the ascendant Seljuk Turks. The Seljuks, relatively recent converts to the Islamic faith, were a formidable military power, and had already conquered a substantial portion of Anatolia, the heartland of Byzantine power. This expansion followed their decisive victory against the Byzantines at the Battle of Manzikert in 1071, a turning point that shattered Byzantine defenses. Their advance also had a profound impact on the Holy Land, disrupting the established order and fueling anxieties in Europe, as stories began to circulate about Christian pilgrims being harassed, robbed, and even killed while traveling to sacred sites. As these accounts spread, outrage grew across Europe, fueled by tales of desecrated holy sites, the destruction of churches, and the murder of devout pilgrims seeking spiritual solace. In the West, a restless, militaristic society accustomed to violence and driven by religious fervor was primed and ready for action, eager for a cause to champion. Simultaneously, in the East, the Byzantine Emperor Alexios I Komnenos, facing imminent collapse, desperately sought assistance from the West to bolster his defenses and reclaim lost territories. He dispatched envoys to Pope Urban II, appealing for military aid, primarily hoping to recruit a contingent of mercenaries to reinforce his army and defend his crumbling empire against the Seljuk onslaught. But what followed was an event of far greater magnitude and consequence than anyone could have possibly foreseen, a transformative movement that would fundamentally reshape the political, religious, and cultural landscape of the world. The stage was now irrevocably set, a divided and volatile Europe, simmering with internal conflicts, a threatened Byzantine Empire, teetering on the brink of collapse, desperately seeking salvation, and a Holy Land engulfed in turmoil, its sacred sites under threat, its pilgrims vulnerable. The desperate call for help from the East would soon ignite a firestorm of religious fervor and military ambition in the West. The fuse of religious zeal and political opportunism had been lit, and the consequences would be far-reaching. The world, as it was known, was poised on the precipice of change, about to be transformed forever by the events that were about to unfold. The First Crusade, a watershed moment in history, was about to begin, setting in motion a chain of events that would reverberate across centuries. In November 1095, Pope Urban II convened a council at Clermont, France. He addressed a massive crowd, describing the suffering of Eastern Christians and the threat of the Seljuk Turks. Urban called for knights to stop fighting each other and instead unite against a common enemy. He framed the campaign as a holy mission to reclaim Jerusalem, the most sacred city in Christendom. The Pope offered a powerful incentive. Anyone who joined the crusade would receive a full remission of sins and indulgence. In a deeply religious age, this was irresistible. The crowd erupted, shouting, "Deus vult!" God wills it. Urban's speech transformed a local conflict into a pan-European cause. The crusade was no longer just a military expedition, it was a spiritual quest. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The First Crusade had its marching orders. Pope Urban envisioned a disciplined, well-organized army, knights in shining armor marching under divine banners. He imagined a force capable of reclaiming the Holy Land with piety and military precision. But his impassioned call to arms resonated far beyond the noble ranks. It ignited a fervent religious zeal, inspiring thousands upon thousands of ordinary people, the common folk, to take up the cross. They felt compelled to act immediately, driven by faith and the promise of salvation. Led by charismatic, albeit unorthodox, preachers like Peter the Hermit, who stirred their souls with visions of a liberated Jerusalem. This became known as the People's Crusade, a spontaneous movement of peasants, artisans, the desperately poor, and anyone else who felt the call to liberate the Holy Land. They set out months before the official organized armies of knights and nobles could even mobilize. Lacking proper supplies, military training, and any semblance of discipline, their journey was fraught with peril from the very start. They quickly devolved into a desperate, unruly mob, driven by hunger and desperation. As they crossed the unfamiliar and often hostile landscapes of Eastern Europe, they inevitably clashed with the local populations, often resulting in violence and bloodshed. Desperate for sustenance, they pillaged villages and towns for food, further alienating the people whose lands they traversed. They suffered heavy losses along the way, succumbing to disease, starvation, and the swords of those who resisted their passage. When the ragged remnants of this people's crusade finally reached the gates of Constantinople, Emperor Alexios Komnenos, ruler of the Byzantine Empire, was utterly appalled by their appearance and lack of discipline. Eager to be rid of them and prevent further disruption within his capital, he swiftly ferried them across the Bosphorus and into Anatolia, the heart of Seljuk territory. He issued a stern warning, advising them to wait for the arrival of the main Crusader armies before engaging the enemy. But fueled by religious fervor and a naive sense of invincibility, they were impatient and recklessly advanced. They marched straight into a carefully laid ambush by the Seljuk Turks at a place called Sivato. The result was a devastating massacre, a complete and utter rout. Almost the entire People's Crusade was wiped out in a single, brutal encounter, their dreams of liberating Jerusalem shattered. The first wave of the Crusades had ended in abject tragedy, a testament to the dangers of zealotry without discipline. It served as a grim warning to those who would follow, highlighting the perils that lay ahead in the war for the Holy Land. The real crusading armies, the organized forces of knights and nobles, had yet to arrive in the east. The stakes were now higher than ever, the path forward paved with the blood of the People's Crusade. The true test of the Crusades, the clash between Christendom and Islam, was about to begin in earnest. The main force, the Prince's Crusade, was a coalition of Europe's greatest nobles and their armies. Leaders like Godfrey of Bouillon, Raymond of Toulouse, Bohemond of Taranto, and Robert of Normandy brought thousands of knights and soldiers. Their motivations ranged from piety to ambition for land and glory. The armies traveled separately but converged on Constantinople, where Emperor Alexios demanded oaths of loyalty. Tensions ran high, but most leaders agreed, hoping for Byzantine support. Unlike the People's Crusade, these armies were disciplined and well supplied. Their arrival marked the true beginning of the campaign. The Crusaders were ready to march into enemy territory. The fate of the Holy Land hung in the balance. The Prince's Crusade was about to test its strength. The real battle was about to begin. In spring 1097, the Crusader armies crossed into Asia Minor, facing the harsh Anatolian landscape and the Seljuk Sultanate. Their first target was Nicaea, a formidable city and Seljuk capital. The march was brutal. Scorched earth tactics, heat and thirst claimed many lives. Seljuk horse archers harassed the column, striking and vanishing before the knights could respond. At Dorylaeum, Bohemond's vanguard was ambushed and nearly destroyed. Reinforcements led by Godfrey and Raymond arrived just in time, turning the tide and routing the Seljuks. The victory shattered Seljuk resistance in Anatolia and boosted Crusader morale, but the journey remained grueling, with hunger and exhaustion ever present. The Crusaders pressed on, determined to reach their goal. Every mile was a test of endurance and faith. The road to Jerusalem was long and perilous. The crusade marched on. Nicaea, the Seljuk capital, was the Crusaders' first major siege. The city's massive walls and lakeside position made it a daunting target. The Crusaders blockaded the landward sides and built siege engines, but couldn't cut off supplies by lake. Sultan Kilij Arslan's attempt to break the siege failed, and his army was repelled. The Crusaders called for Byzantine help. Alexios sent ships, dragging them overland to the lake. With their supply line cut, the defenders surrendered. To the Byzantines, not the Crusaders, the city fell without a final assault, frustrating many Crusaders who felt cheated of plunder. Still, the capture of Nicaea was a strategic victory. The alliance with Byzantium proved its worth, but tensions simmered. The Crusaders pressed on, their eyes set on greater prizes. The road to Jerusalem was open. The crusade moved forward. In October 1097, the Crusaders reached Antioch, a city of immense religious and strategic importance. Its massive walls and strong garrison made it nearly impregnable. The siege dragged on for 8 months with famine, disease, and desertion decimating the army. Despite suffering, the Crusaders repelled 2 relief armies. Victory came through treachery. Bohemond bribed a tower commander, and a small group opened the gates. The Crusaders stormed the city, unleashing a brutal massacre. Days later, they were besieged inside Antioch by a massive Muslim army led by Kerboga. Trapped and starving, hope seemed lost. Then, a monk claimed to discover the holy lance believed to be the spear that pierced Christ. This miracle revived morale. The Crusaders prepared for a desperate breakout. Faith and desperation would decide their fate. The siege of Antioch became legend. The rediscovery of the Holy Lance, a relic believed to have pierced Christ's side, became a pivotal moment. It inspired the Crusaders, breathing new life into their flagging spirits after the long and arduous siege of Antioch. The discovery was seen as divine intervention, a sign that God was on their side. This newfound zeal propelled them to break out of Antioch and decisively defeat Kerboga's numerically superior army, lifting the siege and securing a crucial victory. However, after months of delay, internal disputes and infighting amongst the leadership, the Crusader army remained fractured and disorganized. Despite these challenges, the Crusaders, driven by religious fervor and the desire to fulfill their vows, finally marched south towards Jerusalem, their ultimate goal. In June 1099, after years of campaigning, they finally reached the walls of the holy city, Jerusalem, their hearts filled with a mixture of hope and trepidation. They were exhausted from the long journey, depleted rations and constant battles, but remained determined to liberate the city from Muslim control. Jerusalem's defenses were formidable, with towering walls, strong gates, and well-positioned towers, presenting a significant obstacle to the Crusaders. The Fatimid garrison, composed of experienced soldiers, was well prepared to defend the city, having anticipated the Crusaders' arrival and fortified their positions. The Crusaders struggled with the harsh conditions, facing extreme thirst, oppressive heat, and dwindling supplies in the arid landscape surrounding Jerusalem. Compounding their difficulties was a severe lack of materials and skilled labor necessary for constructing effective siege engines, hindering their ability to breach the city walls. Recognizing the dire situation and the declining morale of the troops, to restore unity and purpose, the clergy organized a solemn barefoot procession around the city walls, seeking divine intervention and urging the Crusaders to repent for their sins. This act of piety and collective penance renewed their spirits, instilling a sense of purpose and determination in the weary Crusaders. Fueled by renewed faith and a desperate desire to achieve their objective, the Crusaders launched a final, all-out assault on Jerusalem on July 15, 1099. After intense fighting and heavy losses on both sides, Godfrey of Bouillon's men finally managed to breach the northern walls of the city, gaining a foothold within Jerusalem. With the walls breached, the Crusaders fought their way to the city gates, opening them for the rest of the army to pour in and overwhelm the defenders. What followed was a horrific massacre, a brutal and indiscriminate slaughter of the city's inhabitants by the victorious Crusaders. The Crusaders showed no mercy, killing thousands of Muslim and Jewish inhabitants, regardless of age or gender, in a frenzy of religious zeal and vengeance. After the bloodshed subsided, the Crusaders claimed Jerusalem as their own, establishing a Christian kingdom in the heart of the Holy Land. In capturing Jerusalem, the Crusaders believed they were fulfilling their sacred vow, completing their pilgrimage, and securing their place in heaven. The capture of Jerusalem marked the bloody climax of the First Crusade, a pivotal moment in medieval history that would have far-reaching consequences. The Holy City was finally theirs, a prize hard won after years of struggle, sacrifice, and bloodshed. But it came at a terrible cost, a stain of violence and brutality that would forever tarnish the legacy of the First Crusade. The world would never be the same, as the events of the First Crusade reshaped the political, religious, and cultural landscape of both Europe and the Middle East. With Jerusalem captured, the Crusaders' mission was complete. Godfrey of Bouillon became the city's ruler, refusing the title of king. The Crusaders repelled a final Fatimid attack at Ascalon, securing their new state. Most survivors returned home, leaving a small garrison behind. 4 Crusader states were established: Jerusalem, Antioch, Edessa, and Tripoli. These fragile kingdoms would face constant threats for centuries. The First Crusade boosted the papacy's power and opened new trade routes, but it also deepened the divide between Christianity and Islam. For the West, it was a triumph. For the Muslim world, a catastrophe. The legacy of the First Crusade would echo for generations. The age of crusading had begun.